All right, welcome to Book by Book. And today we are going to be walking through Isaiah 60 through chapter 63, verse 6. And so we have a good amount of text to cover, but this week and then next week, and then we're done with Isaiah. So this has been a long journey for sure. It's the longest book we have covered and spent the most time in. Unless you count like First and Second Samuel as one book, or First and Second Kings as one book. But yeah, so this week we are going to be looking at these 3+ chapters, and we're going to look at how God's glory comes to the city, and we're going to look at God's anointed one and his role, the transformation of Zion. And then we'll look at divine justice in the last little section. And so part of the reason why I'm breaking these sections down this way is looking at one of the commentaries that I've been using to prep, kind of following his outline. And so he looks at 60 verse 1 through 63 verse 6 as one section. And he just titled this section, God Will Bring Salvation to Transform Zion and Destroy the Wicked. And so so there's a lot of debate as I was reading, a lot of debate on where to break these different verses down in the in analyzing the text. But I'm going with this outline just because it makes good sense to me as I have been walking through. So there's 8 themes that kind of recur throughout these chapters. The themes are: God will save his people, he will give light to them, he will share his glory with them, the nations will be drawn to what they see of God in Israel, they will restore Zion's children to her, the nations will bring their wealth to give to Israel, those who had oppressed Israel will be brought low, they'll be humbled, and she will be exalted over them, and Israel will both experience and exemplify the righteousness of God. And so that's really how Isaiah is coming to a close in these last couple chapters. We'll see those themes over and over again. So let's just jump in here. Chapter 60, verse 1 through 9 is what I'm going to read first. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. All assemble and come to you. Your sons come from afar, and your daughters are carried on the hip. Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth of the seas will be brought to you. To the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you. The rams of Nebaioth will serve you. They will be accepted as offerings on my altar, and I will adorn. Sorry. Somebody joining. Let me just jump in. I will adorn my glorious temple. Who are these that fly along like clouds, like doves to their nests? Surely the islands look to me. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish, bringing your children from afar, with their silver and gold, to the honor of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. So this chapter, in 4 different times, looks at the ways that Israel has endured their previous period of affliction and suffering, and now that's all ended. And so all of these different blessings that they're experiencing are a kind of reversal from what was happening as they were faced with different national crises of other countries coming and pillaging them and different challenges like that. Now the nations are coming to the people of Israel. And so, it's a reversal of fortunes for God's people here. And the reason they're coming now to Israel is because God's glory is attracting them to Zion, to Jerusalem, to the place that God chooses to let his glory dwell. And so his light shines. Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of God is what is bringing this different light. And so we look at this section, and where there is darkness, the light of the Lord drives it out. And one of the things that has stuck with me from when I was in high school and took an astronomy class was that we don't measure darkness, we measure light. And wherever darkness is, light is not there. Or wherever light is, there can't be darkness, because darkness technically isn't a thing. It's just the absence of light. And so for the Lord's glory to dwell there after all these years that Isaiah has talked about exile and removing the people from Jerusalem, and we'll see that theme pick up again in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and other prophets. But now that light is returning to Zion, and the nations are coming. And so this verse, or this chapter, kind of looks at the different ways that instead of Israel paying tribute to the other nations are going to bring their wealth to the people in Jerusalem, but not for the people themselves, but for offerings and sacrifice. And so these sacrifices are part of the way that we can see, like, there's a redemption of the nations that's happening in the book of Isaiah that is the prophet is looking toward. But all of these, herds and the camels and all of the different gold and incense, all these things are coming as gifts to the people. So these are coming from the south and from the east, and then from the west, we have ships coming from Tarshish. And Tarshish was believed to be the farthest point of the known world, kind of the western coast of Spain. And so when Jonah tries to run away from the Lord, he gets on a boat bound for Tarshish, and so very far away. And the Tarshishians were known as traders, and they had ships that would go all along the Mediterranean coast and trade with all these different ports, and so they were very wealthy. And so even they are bringing the ships of wealth to the city of Jerusalem, to Zion. But all of this is because the glory of the Lord. And one of the things that's bringing the Lord glory in this section is the fact that the people are being restored. The people who had lost everything, who had been in exile, who had been a byword to the nations, are being restored in a way where it's like only the Lord could have accomplished this. And so that's one of the reasons why people are like, oh wow, the Lord of Israel, the God Yahweh, is the real deal. He's able to do these impossible things. And so the people are coming to bring praise and to bring their offerings to the Lord at the temple there. Now, one of the things that as we read through Isaiah, there are several times where we should have, I've said this before, but little like alerts that go off, say, that sounds familiar. In the end of Revelation, John is writing, and one of the things he talks about is the wealth of the nations will come into the city. And so John is alluding to these promises in the book of Isaiah. And we'll see more of that sort of thinking echoed in coming chapters here. But it's important to note that when we think about, like, when is this happening, there is an eschatological anticipation, because we've never really seen this kind of restoration in Jerusalem, even after the exile. So yes, they have returned, but God's glory and his ultimate plan has not been fulfilled completely. And so so we can read this and say, oh, look what God has done in bringing them back from exile. But also we look to a greater future where we are still anticipating the Lord bringing the nations into Jerusalem someday. When that day will be, we can't know, but someday. So there's a already, but not yet anticipation. But as part of the promises, it continues on in the next section. We see great reversals as well in the restoration of the city. So pick up in 60 verse 10. Foreigners will rebuild your walls, and their kings will serve you. Though in anger I struck you, in favor I will show you compassion. Your gates will always stand open. They will never be shut day or night, so that people may bring you the wealth of the nations. Their kings led in triumphal procession. For the nation or kingdom that will not serve you will perish. It will be utterly ruined. The glory of Lebanon will come to you, the juniper and fir and the cypress together, to adorn my sanctuary. And I will glorify the place for my feet. The children of your oppressors will come bowing before you. All who despise you will bow down at your feet and will call you the city of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel. Although you have been forsaken and hated, with no one traveling through, I will make you the everlasting pride and the joy of all generations. You will drink the milk of nations and be nursed at royal breasts. Then you will know that I, the Lord, am your Savior, your Redeemer, the Mighty One of Jacob. And so this, foreigners will rebuild your walls, is a great reversal here, because who destroyed the walls? Foreigners. And so in this restoration and transformation of the city of Jerusalem, this promise that the people from other nations will come and rebuild the walls. And instead of the people of Israel serving foreign kings, the kings will come to Israel as a way of, in service to the people. And so this is all part of God's great plan of redemption. So even the striking of the people, one of the key pieces here is like, yeah, there was discipline and anger in the Lord as he struck them, but now is a time of compassion and restoration. And so in rebuilding the walls, there will be gates, but they won't need to close because God will be there with them. And they're secure in the Lord's presence. So these different passages, like we've read so much of the coming discipline for the people. And so now we're getting this wonderful picture of restoration and hope, and it will be good and glorious. And so, the people would read this and just probably, if they're reading this before the exile, probably not really have a way to put all of this into context. And so then after the exile, as they're reading this, it's like, look what the Lord is doing. Even if it's not fully realized, he's doing this. And so some of the different pictures here of the treasures and the glory of the nations coming in, the glory of Lebanon coming, Lebanon was known for their massive cedar trees. And so these cedar trees would be brought as, building supplies for the temple when Solomon built the temple. But now they're coming to maybe rebuild the temple, but they are also being planted in the sanctuary. It's kind of how it reads. Like they are there just to be glorious and beautiful as a sign of God's creation. We also get the imagery of the footstool of the Lord being the Ark of the Covenant, because and I will glorify the place for my feet. Is part of that imagery that the Lord looks at the Ark of the Covenant as a footstool in his divine throne room. Another thing that is interesting in this is when in verse 16, it says, you will drink the milk of nations and be nursed at royal breasts. And this is an interesting image because in Pharaoh in Egypt, they were often considered to be like nursed by the pantheon of the gods, and so that's a way of saying like the the deities that they were worshiping were sustaining them and providing for them. And so now, like, the imagery here is that the nations are sustaining and um, taking care of the people of God. And so there's a level of intimacy in this, like where the nations are coming to say, we want to help you, we want to keep you alive in a way that the people of Israel have never experienced before. But all of this, and all of this is happening because the Lord wants the people of Israel to know that He is their sustainer. He is the one who is making all of this happen. And so it's not because they worked real hard or they got real better at being followers of Yahweh. No, it's the Lord's compassion. It's His kindness that is bringing all of this restoration and the blessing from the nations and the gifts from these nations. The Lord is drawing them here. And then it continues even more because we start talking about like building supplies, and the Lord is giving this picture of great prosperity for the people of Israel in chapter 60, verse 17. Instead of bronze, I will bring you gold and silver in place of iron. Instead of wood, I will bring you bronze and iron in place of stones. I will make peace your governor and well-being your ruler. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders, but you will call your walls salvation and your gates praise. The sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set again, and your moon will wane no more. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end. Then all your people will be righteous. They will possess the land forever. They are the shoot I have planted, the work of my hands for the display of my splendor. The least of you will become 1,000, the smallest a mighty nation. I am the Lord. In its time, I will do this swiftly. So this is the transformation of the city of Zion. And it starts with like thinking about the basest of building supplies and how like the gold will be so prevalent that they'll use that instead of bronze, and silver instead of iron, and then iron instead of stones. Like all of these things are happening where like these great and expensive metals are used as common building supplies. Going to the images in Revelation again, one of the things that John talks about is the streets being paved with gold. And you would only do that if you had so much gold, if you had so much wealth that gold became value at the same value as asphalt today, right? And so like that is part of the transformation that the Lord is trying to give the people of Israel, is like, you won't have to worry about these things, the wealth and the building supplies and the quality material. Like the Lord's saying, there will be so much stuff that you will be able to build well beyond what is necessary. And the presence of the Lord in the city is also promised. Instead of kings that are corrupt, peace is the governor and well-being the ruler. The gates are salvation and praise, but the presence of God also means that there's no more darkness, and He will be their light. He will be the sun, and there won't be a need for the moon and that kind of picture of just obliteration of darkness, all because of the glory of the Lord dwelling among the people. And this again picks up in Revelation, where the Lord gives the picture of the New Jerusalem, and John writes down that they will no longer need the sun because the Lord will be their light. So these different echoes, again, like we John is picturing a thing that Isaiah pictured hundreds of years before. And so for followers of Jesus, as we look at these pictures, we can look to Revelation and say, all right, God's still working this out. The New Jerusalem hasn't come. And so we still anticipate the same thing that the people of Israel, as Isaiah was writing to them, they're anticipating that, and we're entering into that same kind of anticipation. And so, yeah, so this picture of God doing something wonderful and restoring his people is something that we should take comfort in. One of the things that people point out is the language of the shoot in verse 21. They are the shoot I have planted. And so earlier we talked about a shoot coming out of a stump, and that's a picture of the Messiah is often how that is interpreted. And so here the Lord is taking that same picture of the shoot, and he's saying they. So the people of Israel are a shoot that is growing out of this stump that was cut down, but there's a new growth happening. And so sometimes we look for metaphors and we try to apply them, like, well, this is the Messiah here, so it's got to be the same thing all the way through. But the writers of the Hebrew scriptures didn't always think that way. And so we have to just be mindful. Just because we heard shoot referring to the Messiah earlier doesn't mean it's always going to refer to the Messiah throughout the scriptures. And so, yeah, so the Lord's glory is coming. The city is being transformed. And so now what does this look like for how they are to live and what is going to happen? And in verse 61, we get this picture of a servant of the Lord who has the Spirit resting on them. And this is the passage that Jesus quotes in Luke 4 in his first sermon in the synagogue. And he refers to this and he reads a portion of this and says, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. And so Jesus took this and applied it to himself. There are a lot of scholars who would debate, like, who is this servant? Is it Isaiah? Is it the people? But for followers of Jesus today, we should not feel uncomfortable saying, well, we're going to say this is talking about Jesus, because Jesus is okay saying this talks about me. So Isaiah 61, verse 1 through 7. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from the darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord, for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Strangers will shepherd your flocks, foreigners will work your fields and vineyards, and you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion, and instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And so you will inherit a double portion in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. So the Spirit of the Lord empowers this servant of God to proclaim good things. And the language of this proclamation is something that echoes different kings in the nations. As they were coming to the throne, they would want to give gifts to the people. And so things like setting prisoners free, relieving debts, those kinds of things were not uncommon. But the language here in particular is very reminiscent of the year of Jubilee that the law calls the people of Israel to practice every 50 years. And it is a complete like economic and social reset. So the land that was sold among the people of Israel would go back to their original families. Prisoners would be set free. All debts would be canceled. All of this stuff would be overturned and set back to the way it was. We have no record of the people of Israel actually doing this. It was a law that was given to them in the Pentateuch, but we don't ever see it happening in practice. And so it may be something that the Lord is longing for the people to do. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why it has come up again. But maybe the reason it never happened in practice was because the kings didn't want to. And so here we have this picture of a spirit anointed person. And those were prophets, priests, and kings in the Old Testament. And so a prophet, a priest, or a king is coming to bring this message. And one of the elements of our faith and understanding of who Jesus is he fulfills all three of those offices: prophet, priest, and king. And so he is our good king who brings this message of Jubilee to us even now. And so it is an interesting thing to say here as the people are coming back from exile and thinking, like, is this the year of Jubilee? Is this the year of the Lord's favor? Is this what we have been anticipating? And we haven't fully seen it realized yet. Jesus accomplished the victory that we need, but we still grieve, we still mourn, and so there are still some things that we are still anticipating here. But the imagery of transformation is, instead of ashes, which is something that people would put on their foreheads when they were in mourning, and the oil of joy. And oil was something that people would put on as a in religious celebrations to anoint themselves, but it was also very fragrant, and so it served as a perfume or a cologne of sorts. And instead of wearing garments of mourning like sackcloth and all of that, they would put on their best clothes because it is the best day, it's the best year. And so these are the kinds of things that people will do. This is how they will live. But then all the things that were destroyed, they're going to rebuild. It'll be a complete transformation as the Spirit of the Lord empowers this king to bring this liberation, to restore the people. And so the buildings that maybe they never went back to because somebody else owned that land technically, now it's restored back to the original families. And so they're like, let's rebuild the old homes that we had. And so they're going back and instead of saying, well, somebody else owns that vineyard, now it's been restored to them. So they go and they take care of it and tend it and bring it back to full health. And then in verse 7, it has this picture of a double portion. And a double portion was part of the inheritance plan. And so let's say you had 4 kids. You would divide the estate into 5 portions. And the eldest son generally would receive 2 of those 5 portions, and the other 3 would go to the other 3 kids. And so here, when it's saying that they will receive a double portion of the inheritance, it's not just the eldest who are receiving this double portion. It's all the people are being promised this double portion, more than they anticipated. And so God's favor and grace is bigger than they could ever imagine. Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm hitting the key pieces here. I think that's good. And then, okay, so 61 verse 8 and 9 says this: "For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. In my faithfulness, I will reward my people and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are a people the Lord has blessed." So here we get a picture of so the Lord now is speaking. So the previous section, it was this Spirit empowered, anointed leader who's bringing restoration. And now it's the Lord talking about how he desires this kind of justice because he himself, he loves justice. And justice is not just punishment for wrongdoers. It is a setting right of things. It is the biblical picture of justice is much more restorative than punitive. And so he loves to restore. He loves to lift up. And so in the way that the people were known in the previous sections as a byword, and they were marked by their shame for their rebellion, now the Lord is bringing them into a status of glory and celebration, and people will see that God is with them. The Lord is with them, and he has blessed them. Let's keep going. 61 verse 10. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. As a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and as a bride adorns herself with jewels, for the soil makes the sprout come up. For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before the nations. So now it comes back from the Lord speaking to either Isaiah speaking or this spirit-empowered servant, talking about how this person is delighting in their relationship with God and the transformation and restoration that he has brought. And so instead of wearing mourning clothes and funeral clothes earlier, we saw this garment of praise and joy given. And so now it's like, well, it's not just that they're happy. They're going to a wedding. They're going to the happiest thing that the people could ever do. And in the ancient world, weddings were the biggest deal. And so the way that the servant here is being dressed by the Lord is as a bridegroom or as a bride. Like there's a great egalitarian message here that bridegroom, bride, both are blessed by God. And so they are dressing up to the nines and it is a sign of God's goodness and provision for them. And so all the nations will see this. They will rejoice at what God has done. And so chapter 61 is a wonderful little picture of what God's anointed servant will do and how he will liberate the people. And so when we read that in the Gospel of Luke and Jesus taking that message and applying it to himself, it's one of those things where we're like, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. We desire your justice. We desire your restoration. And we want to see you bring these things about. And so we have not fully realized it yet, but we long for the day. So let's keep going in chapter 62, verse 1 through 5. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet, till her vindication shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. The nations will see your vindication, and all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will bestow. You will be a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. No longer will they call you deserted or name your land desolate, but you will be called Hephzibah, and your land called Beulah. For the Lord will take delight in you, and your land will be married. As a young man marries a young woman, so will your builder marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you. So this picture of the wedding that the Lord is preparing the people for is a wedding to himself. And like he is the builder here in this passage, and he is bringing the people into a greater relationship with him as a bride and a groom. And so in verse 1, he's talking about how the prophet now is speaking and saying, I will not shut up about how awesome God is. I'm going to keep on talking about it until we see all of this come about and the nations see God's glory and his people vindicated. And the transformation of the name is important as well, because when God does something when God has an encounter with many people in the Old Testament, he changes their name. So think of Jacob to Israel, Abram to Abraham. These name changes are giving significance to the encounter with the Lord, but also to the future that the people are going to walk in the Lord. And so he is looking at all that God is doing in preparing for this this transformation and looking at the changed name. And so where they used to be called deserted and desolate, now it's Hephzibah and Beulah. And Hephzibah means my delight is in her, and Beulah means married, right? Yeah. I was desolate will be called Beulah, literally married. Yeah. Sorry. I got my notes a little mixed up on that part. But so instead of being desolate and alone, they're delightful and married and brought into God's household, into his family. And so this is a wonderful transformation, and it is only possible because of what the Lord is doing. And it will take delight in his new bride in Jerusalem. And so even, again, I know I try to be very careful to say, this is Jesus, just as we're reading through the prophets. But like, this is all part of what John is talking about in Revelation, because the book of Revelation ends with the wedding feast of the Lamb. And this is the picture of the Lord coming to his wedding and having his bride, his people, be brought to him. And so this is all echoes back to from Revelation, echoes back into this passage. Like, this is for first century Jewish readers who are following after Jesus, it would have been like, oh, this is Isaiah. This is what we are anticipating. This is what we are longing for. And so there's an understanding why the early believers, early church would have held on to this promise and like not necessarily lived it out, but anticipated that the Lord would return anytime. And so one of the challenges as the years go by is we lose sight of that anticipation. We lose sight of God's promise because it hasn't fully happened yet. And we have to be careful to not just forget that the real world is happening and we still got to live. But we don't want to lose sight of the hope that we have. We want to ensure that we are walking in hope always. And so these kinds of messages in Isaiah echoing into our time as we're still waiting for this wedding feast. We're waiting for the day that the Lord will come and the wedding feast of the Lamb. And so one of the ways that we can do that is to keep that anticipation is through prayer and through worship and through being intentional with the ways that we seek the Lord. And so in 62, 6 through 9, it says this: I have posted watchmen on your walls, Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest, and give him no rest till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth. The Lord has sworn by his right hand and by his mighty arm, never again will I give your grain as food for your enemies, and never again will foreigners drink the new wine for which you have toiled. But those who harvest it will eat it and praise the Lord, and those who gather the grapes will drink it in the courts of my sanctuary. So the first two verses, 6 and 7, posting watchmen on the walls, like we just read, that the walls will be rebuilt, the gates will always be open. And so the watchmen are not necessarily to be afraid in this section. they are looking out, but they're also proclaiming to God, like, Lord, remember your promises. Lord, remember your promises. And so the posting these watchmen on the walls, they are supposed to be constantly praying and interceding and asking the Lord to fulfill this promise to establish Jerusalem, give him no rest till he establishes Jerusalem. This is another allusion to Jesus in the parable of the persistent widow, who goes to the judge over and over again, and finally the judge is like, huh, okay, fine, I'll do it. Like, that's the kind of tenacity and persistence in prayer that the Lord is calling these watchmen to. Keep praying, keep praying. And as we keep praying, something that I was reminded of even today as I was listening to a pastor, and I'm sure I've shared this before, but prayer doesn't necessarily change God. Prayer changes us so that we become more better aligned to his will. And so as the Lord is tarrying, in an old Pentecostal word, as the Lord tarries and we are still waiting for him to return, this crying out, Lord, remember your promises, is something that we should continue to do. Remember your promises. And we long for the day when the Lord will bring this ultimate restoration. And that in that day, we're also given this picture that where the people had worked so hard to pay tribute to the nations, the Lord has this promise that there will be a day where that will never happen again. And you will enjoy the fruit of your labor and rejoice in God's provision. All right, let's look at chapter 62, verse 10 through 12. Pass through the gates, prepare the way for the people, build up the highway, remove the stones, raise a banner for the nations. The Lord has made his proclamation to the ends of the earth. Say to daughter Zion, see, your Savior comes. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. They will be called the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord. And you will be called sought after, the city no longer deserted. And so here, this is the promise of God's restoration and the call then at this point for the nations, the people of Israel, to return, for all the folks to come back to Jerusalem. And so there's this wonderful invitation and to make the road so there aren't any obstacles that will keep people from coming in. And in the ancient world, there were different ways to communicate to people from a distance. One was using a horn, another was banners. And so raising up a banner to communicate a signal to like advance or retreat, all of those different things, banners would do that. And so this banner is raising up this banner to say the Lord has accomplished what he set out to do. And so come all ye, come to Jerusalem. And so in this procession into the city, then there's also this promise that the Savior comes. And so there is the city itself will be filled with God's people, and it will no longer be deserted, and it'll be a glorious day. And we pray, come, Lord Jesus, come quickly. And make sure I'm hitting the things here. Yes. Okay. All right, one more section, chapter 63, verses 1 through 6. And this is kind of a shift in tone as we jump in here. But the Lord is inviting the nations to come and be a part of his covenant faith community. And he starts with Israel and reestablishes his covenant with them. But there's an invitation to the nations. And then chapter 63, bit of a tone shift. Verse 1 says, who is this coming from Edom, from Basra, with his garments stained crimson? Who is this robed in splendor, striding forward in the greatness of his strength? It is I, proclaiming victory, mighty to save. Why are your garments red, like those of one treading the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations, no one was with me. I trampled them in my anger and trod them down in my wrath. Their blood spattered my garments, and I stained all my clothing. It was for me the day of vengeance. The year for me to redeem had come. I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled that no one gave support. So my own arm achieved salvation for me, and my own wrath sustained me. I trampled the nations in my anger. In my wrath, I made them drunk and poured their blood on the ground. So, yeah, tone shift. We've had a lot of the Lord talking about how good and glorious it's going to be when he reestablishes Jerusalem. And then we read this, and the Lord is coming from Edom. And as revealed here, his garments are red. And it's like, why are your garments red? And so, well, this is the blood of my enemies, which is, that's intense. What happened? And so he's coming from Edom, which is an indicator to us that because Edom was an ancient enemy of the people of Israel. Edom are their descendants of Esau, and Jacob and Esau made peace, but they never really reconciled. And so after the Lord delivered the people from slavery in Egypt, and so they're making their way back up to the land that God had promised to Abraham, Edom would not let them pass, so they had to go around. Edom, as the people, the nations are coming, Assyria and then Babylon are coming against the people of Jerusalem, Edom is helping them. Edom is rejoicing in the fall of the people of Israel. And so here we're seeing there is the previous chapter, there's this invitation of the nation for the nations to come to be a part of God's kingdom, raise the banner, come in. But it seems like there are those who do not want to come. There are those who do not want to be a part of what God is doing. And the Lord is promising that there will be an elimination of the enemies of God and the elimination of the enemies of God's people. And he will do the eliminating. He looked and like, no one can help me. But he still is able to do this work. And so for us, we look at the world and there are things where like, Lord, your judgment becomes swift. Like there are things that we would love to like make our own vengeance, I'm sure, then things that injustices that we would like to correct in our own power, our own strength. But we need to learn to trust the Lord's way and the Lord's time. And that's really hard. It's really hard to do because he doesn't work in our schedule. And so we read passages like this and like, whoa, God, this is intense. But part of it is just a reminder to the people that you don't have to go to war. You don't have to go and fight the enemies of God's people. The Lord will do the justice work. The Lord will do the retribution work. And so we don't have to go look for ways to fight these battles for ourselves, but we can trust that the Lord can do this work for his own benefit, for his own glory. And this is part of the divine warrior motif that we have seen earlier. Last week, we talked about how the Lord's anointed put on the breastplate of righteousness and the armor of truth and all these different things. So that was divine warrior language. And then we get these pictures of restoration and hope and abundance and all these things that God promises. And then there's this picture here in chapter 63 of the divine warrior coming and meting out that justice. And so we have to hold both the compassion and the restoration of God and the justice and retribution of God against his enemies. So we hold them both because they're the same. It's the same God doing this work. And while, like I'm not a big fan of war, I'm not a big fan of needless violence. I recognize that the Lord also is not a fan of needless violence, but he does have enemies, and he will defeat his enemies and restore his people. And one of the comments that I read in one of the commentaries is like, we look at these different passages, and there's a temptation with all of this to say, like, when is the Lord going to do this? Who are the enemies that the Lord is going to trod? And something just to remind ourselves in a theological implication from all of this is just hearing the good news about the coming of God's kingdom is always an encouragement to believers who live in a corrupt and sinful world that has little respect for God. Although many believers are overly concerned about the date of the second coming, when God's kingdom will come to earth in full force, the really important thing to know and to be fully convinced of is that God has the power to accomplish what he has promised. And that's the good news. Like, God can do all these things, and we do not have to get into a place where we need to try to help God bring about the end times or anything like that, or fight God's battles for him. No, trust the Lord. Let him do the work. Let's seek faithfulness. Let's seek restoration and the gospel truth and the message of hope, and let the Lord do the work of judgment and retribution. So let's end there for the night. I did see some people falling away. I don't know if they had internet problems or if I had internet problems, but are there any questions or comments on these chapters? No? Well, all right then, everybody. So next week be our last week in Isaiah. We did it. We did it. And then we'll take 2 weeks off, and we'll come back that first week in October with Jeremiah. So that 2 weeks off will give me a little bit of time to do some of the overview research for Jeremiah and try to figure out like how to best approach this book. But I'm excited and also kind of intimidated by Jeremiah. I'm not going to lie. It's a heavy one. So so we'll be back next week and wrap up Isaiah. Y'all have a good night.